Hello, everybody. Well, I'm going to do something a little bit different than what I usually do on this channel. I ordinarily talk about comic books, but I am also a big sports fan, and recently the NHL Stanley Cup brackets and the regular season were both released slash finished, and I'm going to go over and give my brief thoughts and predictions on who I think is going to win Lord Stanley's Cup at the end of the 2019 season this year. A little bit of warning, I am partial to the Winnipeg Jets. They are my favorite NHL team. So if it feels like I am a little biased when talking about the Winnipeg Jets and predicting, it's because I've watched a lot of their games and I think that they are going to win because, well, they're my favorite team. So the bracket kind of goes like this in the first round. I'm going to go by round, by match. So the first round match in the Eastern Conference, or actually, in the Eastern Conference is the Tampa Bay Lightning, who won the President's Trophy Cup against the Columbus Blue Jackets. And I hate to admit it, but as much as Tampa Bay tends to choke in the playoffs, I am not buying Columbus actually doing a whole lot. They might win a game, but they're not going to win the series. If they do win the series, then that might actually be enough to save a lot of jobs in that organization because they're big pieces. Pierre-Luc Dubois, he's actually locked up, but Artemi Panarin and Sergei Bobrovsky, their goaltender, both of them are management has kind of seemingly wanted an excuse to get rid of them, and I think that if they win in the first round, they'll somehow lose that excuse. But overall, there's just no way. Tampa Bay, they've been dominant all season long. If they lose the first two games, Tampa Bay, then I'd panic. But if they win even just one game at Amalie Arena in Tampa Bay to start the series, yeah, they're going to advance. The next series is between the Boston Bruins and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I'm sorry, but other than it's actually kind of an interesting matchup because Boston has been hurt most of the year, and they don't have a whole lot of potency in their offense minus their top line of attackers. Meanwhile, Toronto has one of the arguably worst defenses in the playoffs in terms of their blue line. I mean, they do have they have gotten better as the season's gone on, but their defense doesn't actually inspire terror, and Freddie Anderson, their goalie, hasn't proven that he can carry the load in the playoffs. It'll be very interesting to see, especially when you consider that you've got Austin Matthews of Toronto and John Tavares both playing on this line, on the same line, and they both played very, very well. It's going to be very interesting to see. I honestly think that Toronto will actually manage to take the series against Boston, but I think it will be I think this will probably be one of the few matchups in the first round that will require 7 games. Up next, we have the Washington Capitals against the Carolina Hurricanes. And I've got to admit, if you told me at the beginning of the season this would be a playoff matchup, I might have called you a liar. Carolina is the second wildcard team, despite being involved in a very strong metropolitan division. The Washington Capitals, of course, entering the year defending their Stanley Cup. This is actually probably another series that I could honestly see going to 7 games. Part of me actually wants to say that the Hurricanes could come out on top and win this because the Hurricanes have played extremely well down the stretch, especially defensively. The problem with them is goaltending. And you can say whatever you want about Washington and that, prior to last year they were choke artists in the playoffs, but usually in the first round you could count on them. You've got Alexander Ovechkin still playing good. You've got minimal injuries to the Washington main starting core, and that I think is going to carry them. It'll probably be a slugfest of a series that will go the distance, but again, I'm actually going to pick the Caps to at least make it to the second round to defend their title. Up next, the New York Islanders against the Pittsburgh Penguins. This is the other major matchup of intrigue, and it's kind of interesting to see The New York Islanders, they were at one point at the top of the Metropolitan Division. They fell back a little bit, and they still managed to finish second place. Their defense has been really, really good. Barry Trotz, the former head coach of the Capitals, who helped them win last year, has really brought a lot of good things and good vibes to the New York Islanders, a much-needed defensive boost. Their offense is still very, very good. I don't know if it's going to be able to compete with the Pittsburgh Penguins, who managed to turn it up when it comes down to the playoffs. The Penguins are dealing with a lot of injuries, and they also do have, especially to their defense, and more to the point, they also actually have one of the more slower defenses in the NHL heading into this season. Unfortunately, the Islanders are missing two key players in Andrew Ladd and Tom Fritz. I believe that's and Tanner Fritz. My bad. That one of their centers. He hasn't really done a whole lot, admittedly, but he is on IR. And when it comes to the playoffs, if you are lacking that depth heading into the season, you're honestly probably going to have, a more difficult time. I honestly think that the Islanders will actually surprise people, and I think they take it against the Penguins in round number 1. The Penguins, or the Islanders, rather. I'm going to go 6 games for them. I think, by the way, that the Lightning will sweep the Blue Jackets. I didn't mention that earlier. Now on to the Western Conference first round. Calgary versus Colorado. Colorado got hot at the right time and managed to outlast both the Minnesota Wild and the Arizona Coyotes, poor Arizona, and also surging at the very end of the season Chicago Blackhawks team. However, again, this is, I think, a case of where Calgary has just played well all season long, and even though their goaltending and doesn't really inspire the greatest degree of confidence, especially in the second round for me, I think that they can take on Colorado and they can win in 6 games. So there is that. Up next, it is a rematch from the second round last year, the San Jose Sharks against the Vegas Golden Knights. Yes, you heard correctly. The Vegas Golden Knights made the playoffs 2 years in a row, 2 years into the league and 2 playoff rounds, hoping to get back to the Stanley Cup after getting there and only winning 1 game. Can they do it? I don't know. Ordinarily, it would be a no-brainer for me. I would pick the Sharks hands down, but the Sharks have had a lot of injuries heading in. They're getting some of their players back, but Erik Karlsson in particular missed at least the last month of the regular season due to injuries, and their defense has been absolutely abhorrent in terms of the metrics, if you actually care about that kind of stuff. But I do think that they have enough firepower and veteran experience to actually take Vegas not only to the limit but past it, and I think that they will win this series. It, of course, also depends on whether or not Peter DeBoer of the San Jose Sharks, their head coach, can actually adapt to Vegas this time around and not just get stuck in a pattern and, manage to adjust defensive schemes to match their offensive schemes. I think it'll actually go down to 7 games, and I would probably predict that the Sharks will win. Next match is Nashville, who won the Central Division against the Dallas Stars. I'm honestly just going to save myself the trouble and say that Nashville's going to win. Nashville's a complete team. Don't get me wrong, Ben Bishop and the Stars defensively have played really about as good as any other team. Really, only the New York Islanders have allowed fewer goals this year than them, which is kind of why I say that, why I was actually picking the Islanders to beat the Penguins. And ordinarily, I like a strong defense as opposed to a good offense, but the Predators are good offensively and defensively. They have great depth. I think the Predators win. I don't think it's going to be a lopsided affair, but I do think that it's going to be a 5-game victory for the Preds, a 5-game series. Up next, my Winnipeg Jets against the St. Louis Blues. Both the Blues and the Jets are limping into the playoffs with some injuries, although thankfully not too many key players. Although Brandon Tanev of the Jets being injured is not a good sign, especially late into the season for the Jets. But still, at least for the most part, I would say that both teams, when it matters, have the players that they need. The Jets just have too much speed, and they're also not a one-line team. Now, don't get me wrong, the Blues aren't a one-line team either, but I think the Blues play best when they play some good defense, and also Vladimir Tarasenko is kind of like the Patrick Laine of the St. Louis Blues in that if he's struggling, the team isn't necessarily losing, but he's a good indicator as to how good they're going to be because he is one of their flagship star pieces. The biggest thing that's probably going to decide this match will be goaltending. I think that Winnipeg, even though Connor Hellebuyck can be rather inconsistent, and unfortunately for the Jets, Laurent Brossoit is going to be out for at least maybe the first couple games, so they won't have their reliable backup ready to go. I still think that Hellebuyck, at least if they can get him past the first round and maybe even the second round relatively quickly, that the Jets might not have so much trouble in terms of burning him out at the very end. All right, so we're going to go back over to the Eastern Conference second round match. In my prediction world would be the Lightning versus the Maple Leafs. Part of me wants to say that the Lightning lose this round and they choke it away, but I think that they just have, again, too much guns to compete with for Toronto to compete, especially with the fact that Toronto just defensively is not as good as they could be. So yeah, that's in my opinion, I think the Lightning will win. It will be tight. The Lightning will probably win in 6 games against the Maple Leafs, though, to carry themselves to a repeat of the Western Conference or the Eastern Conference Finals. My apologies. And then the other match in the second round for the Eastern Conference. This is actually kind of interesting, and part of me wants to say the Islanders win because of their defensive structure that they have, and they do have a great defensive structure. But I think that this year is not their year. It's just too early, in my opinion, for them. They might make it next year or in the next couple of years, especially if they manage to keep the core together. But this year will not be the year for Long Island to bring home the Stanley Cup, unfortunately. I think the Caps will make a repeat appearance to the conference finals. In the second round on the Western Conference side, the Sharks versus the Flames. I think the Sharks take that finally next step, especially if Erik Karlsson gets healthy. The Calgary Flames are just not that good when it comes to playing on the road in California, as the Anaheim Ducks can attest. And I don't know what their road record is necessarily against San Jose, but I'm assuming that the state of California might just be the kryptonite for the Calgary Flames. Not to mention that I do think that if the Sharks, again, if they get Erik Karlsson back and if they play well enough defensively against the Vegas Golden Knights, I don't see any real reason why they should not be able to keep up with the Calgary Flames. It'll probably be another 6-game series, but I would not be surprised if the Sharks finally make it back to the Western Conference Finals. Do they make it to the Stanley Cup? Maybe, maybe not. A rematch from the second round of last year, Nashville versus Winnipeg. I think that this is going to go down to the wire, much like it did last year, sadly. I think it's going to come down to, can Winnipeg outspeed the bruising Predators once again in 7 games? I don't know if they can. I don't know if home ice in the final in a final game 7 makes the difference for the Predators. But part of me is going to root just for the Jets and say that they have a chance in this. And since they did do it last year and they are capable of beating the Predators and they have played pretty well against them all season, I am going to go with Winnipeg even though I'm probably going to end up regretting that later on. And now the Eastern Conference Finals, the Lightning versus the Capitals, a rematch from last year. I think the Capitals, they're gonna make it back to the Stanley Cup. I just like the team a lot. I mean, they hit a couple skids in the middle of the season, but I think the Lightning are just going to choke it away because I think that they just don't have the reputation for me to trust them in this situation. Yeah, they've won a Stanley Cup beforehand, and yes, they do have the talent to go there again, but I think that the Capitals eventually will overpower them with both playoff experience and just the overall ability. I think it will come down to 7 games, though. Washington will win in Game 7, and that will also be on the road, too, so there's that to consider. So that's a bold prediction if you believe in the home ice advantage thing. But I believe the Caps make it back. And last but not least, the San Jose Sharks taking on the Winnipeg Jets in my version of the Western Conference Finals. I think the Jets, again, they just have a team that's full of depth. They got back Dustin Byfuglien, one of their better defensemen. And honestly, if they at any point in the playoffs get back Brandon Tanev and Morrissey, they might actually be the most healthy team then, by that end round, maybe, possibly. Again, a lot of this hinges, and I want to say that the Sharks' performance honestly does hinge a lot on Erik Karlsson if he comes back and if he can play at a healthy level. If that's the case, then, again, don't be surprised if a run towards the Stanley Cup is made by the Sharks, especially if they can get past Vegas, because I think that will probably be their a bigger test than Calgary, honestly. But I think Winnipeg, with their 4 lines, and if Connor Hellebuyck can remain at a consistently good level, and even if he can't, as long as Laurent Brossoit comes back and actually plays, it doesn't even have to be maybe more than 3 or 4 games, but if they can give Hellebuyck rest at any point in the playoffs so that he doesn't have to start every single game, I do think that the Winnipeg Jets, despite the odds, and I know these are long odds because it's not, it's a tough conference that they're playing in, but they can, in my opinion, go to the Stanley Cup Finals. And I do think, by the way, that they'll win, like I said, in 7. Them playing against the Caps, I think that Winnipeg, despite their struggles heading into the close of the season, will win this year's Stanley Cup. And I know that, like I said, I'm a Winnipeg Jets fan. I have been since they were both reintroduced to the league and even a little bit before they were deactivated from the league. I was never an Atlanta Thrashers fan, but I was a Winnipeg Jets fan when they got reactivated and the like. I think that it's going to come down to coaching, and I honestly think that Paul Maurice, much in the same way Barry Trotz was due for a Stanley Cup last year with how he guided the team, I think Paul Maurice is one of the top candidates for Coach of the Year, the way he's managed to keep this team from falling apart when injuries did pile up to some of their better players, not named Scheifele, Laine, and Wheeler. Again, I think it's going to come down to goaltending, and despite the fact that Brandon Holtby of the Capitals is a very, very good goaltender, I don't think that he's going to be able to outduel Connor Hellebuyck in a series where, again, the Winnipeg Jets, they're just a very complete team, very, very depth-filled, and in terms of their full line, there's nobody on the lines that of Winnipeg where you could say, oh, they don't belong in the NHL, because they do have that kind of talent level. It's going to be very interesting. Of course, I may be horribly, horribly wrong, but I hope you guys enjoyed this video nonetheless. I may do more sports videos down the road. just because this is a channel that is called or has a logo that says Comics Corner does not mean that I focus exclusively on comic books. Hope you guys enjoy this, and until then, if you are a hockey fan, hope you enjoy the playoffs just like me. And if you're a Winnipeg Jets fan, thank you very much. If you're a Predators fan, hey, and they happen to beat the Jets, and then I just hope then that they go to the Stanley Cup Finals because, well, if anybody's going to beat the Winnipeg Jets, then I'd probably prefer they go to the Cup Finals and win. Anyways, thank you guys all for listening. Have a great day, and go Jets!